So I do have some ideas this time. I want to talk about, it's kind of one big topic that I've broken up into different segments, I guess you could say. But essentially it comes down to how the world changes around us and how we're so set on it being permanent. The first thing I'll bring up is wanting, what I like to call wanting versus enjoying. That's what I've simplified it to. So it's probably most often seen in relationships, maybe a new hobby that you have, where when something is new, it's exciting, it's got novelty to it, you know, you're discovering things about it. But over time, over months, over years, eventually that goes away and there's no novelty. There may be new stuff, but a lot less new stuff, so it becomes normal and ordinary. So it becomes a normal part of your life. It stops being new. It starts being part of your daily routine. It's not new. It might even become boring. And so the distinction is, do you want the thing or do you enjoy the thing? Because wanting the thing is more of the novelty side versus enjoying is when all of the new stuff is stripped away, you have whatever's left, which is not like there's nothing left, you know? So what's that essential, ordinary factor that's left behind? You know, you need to learn to enjoy that part specifically and not need novelty or newness for something to be interesting. And it's not like that's easy to do. And I think most people learn how to do that. You know, because it's most common in relationships. You know, I mean, honeymoon phase is a phrase for a reason. It's because at first things are fun, new, whatever. And eventually it becomes normal, potentially even boring. Some people can't stand that. And then they move on, which really is not how you should do it. You need to learn that the ordinary thing underneath that is the only thing that actually matters. And then that kind of ties into accepting the ordinary, which is the next kind of thing I've broken it into. Which just comes down to accepting, well, the ordinary. So, for example, if you have goals or you have motivations or something, you might have some idealized or romanticized image of it or what it takes to get there, when in reality it's not that exciting. It's pretty much all goals are achieved by small, boring steps repeated consistently every day to actually get where you want to go. It's not some giant revelation that you get one day and then you start being a workaholic, relentlessly chasing this thing. You know, because if you do that, you're just gonna burn out. It's not gonna work. I've done it. It doesn't work. For some people, I guess it might, but for most, it doesn't work like that. So you need to accept and essentially love that ordinariness that comes with what you actually want to do. And of course it depends what that actually is. And the next topic is about identity. More specifically, when identity is applied through things like interests or hobbies or even people. So for example, I'm on a motorcycle. I would consider myself someone who rides motorcycles, or a biker, which is an identity. It's a part of yourself. Which, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's kind of the same with people. You know, how close do you want someone to get to you? How close do you want to get to someone? Especially if it's a romantic relationship. Because the closer you tie that thing into yourself, the more it becomes a part of you. But if that thing happens to go away or fade out, like a person can leave, a hobby can fade out. Because things aren't forever, of course. People change, we change, our interests change. So, how intertwined with yourself do you want that thing to become? Because on one hand, it can be really nice to make it part of your identity and it's something you love, or if it's a person you love, and that thing doesn't happen to fade out or go away, then it's nice. But if that thing does happen to leave, it's gonna suck. Because if you have hobbies that are part of your identity and they start to fade out, you don't feel like yourself anymore. You feel like you're losing parts of yourself. And that's something I've personally experienced, still do. So you have to kind of think, is it worth it? And it's not like it has to be one or the other. It can be in between. But it also doesn't have to be an identity too. You know? The next thing that branches off of that is self-awareness, which I guess is kind of similar in a way. I didn't really know how to explain it besides calling it self-awareness, but basically being aware of what you're doing or the things that you do. You know, which is also where I think Zen principles kind of tie into that. You know, because I forgot exactly how it goes, but it's something like chop wood, get water, sleep, and then after enlightenment, you chop wood, you drink water, you sleep. Nothing actually changes with what happens, but the relationship with the things that do happen change. And another thing I remember from a book I was listening to that I think explained it pretty well was about babies. So you imagine a baby or like a young kid playing, for example. They don't have much self-awareness. They're just playing. They're not thinking about it. They're just completely absorbed by what they're doing. But when we have self-awareness, it's harder to do that. We're constantly thinking of things while we're doing something. So we're not actually fully present in the task or whatever it is that we're doing. Because there's obviously a good part of self-awareness. You know, if you're doing something dangerous, you can self-monitor yourself, check yourself, make sure you're being careful. If you're doing something complicated, you can check the steps you've done or did or are doing. Make sure you're doing it right. But obviously there's the bad side too. You're constantly self-judging yourself, constantly wondering things about what you're doing instead of just doing the damn thing. It can be distracting. And I think that kind of ties into identity by constantly being aware of the thing. Because when it's your identity, it's a part of you. So obviously, you're thinking about it a lot, even if it's not consciously. And the next topic is about ego. About the two sides of ego. Kind of at the self-awareness. There's a good and a bad, although with the ego, that's not really what I'm talking about. It's not a good or bad thing, it's just two different sides that I've kind of noticed. Because everyone has an ego, obviously, but egos can be different. While pretty much all egos are focused on the self, I think there's two different kinds of ego. One which is focused more internally, and one which is focused more externally. So typically when you would think of someone with a big ego, you think of someone who's an attention seeker, or they want external validation. You know, they're constantly showing off, trying to flaunt themselves for validation from others. But I think there's a different type which is more focused internally towards yourself, where you try to be the opposite of that, which would be essentially if you're trying to be humble, maybe trying to be seen as humble or not having an ego. Ironically, strokes your own ego, makes you feel good about yourself. You know. types of that. Trying to remember what's next, but I'm hoping we might be able to get a common theme from all of that. Are you kidding me? I can't even go that way. Alright then. To see if there's a different way. Oh, right. Okay. The next thing I wanted to bring up was kind of the evolution of human frontiers. Kind of the things that we strive towards as a whole. Where am I going here? This way. But like I was saying, because over time we've kind of evolved into what we are curious about. You know, you think back long ago to when we first became humans or animals or whatever. You know, we were curious about what kind of can't think right now. Hold on. This construction is throwing me off. But obviously long ago, ancient times, we were animals exploring the planet. Things we were curious about were mostly geography. You know, mountains, treacherous terrain of the earth that we didn't know about. And even till a couple hundred years ago, we didn't explore the whole of the earth. You know, when you think about a map from back then, the map didn't end because that was the whole earth. The map ended because that's all that we knew. It was a limit of knowledge, not a limit of what was actually there. So we always knew that there was something else left. So we were always curious about what was next. And even now, honestly, still curious about our own planet. But look how that's shifted from, you know, filling out our maps hundreds of years ago to the Americas, for example, to something like now, where we're exploring space. You know, you think of the moon, we've only had people on the moon for, you know, days or weeks, total amount of time. Or Mars, we only have robots on Mars. And even the next nearest star or galaxy, those are the things we're curious about now. And I feel like over time, as we know more about stuff, it isn't very descriptive, but obviously as we keep evolving our curiosities, I feel like we might begin to look inward more about ourselves. We've always done, really. But our natural curiosity has to go somewhere. I feel like that's where it might go. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what else to talk about. Pretty much everything I was thinking about. For my gap sesh. So I think we'll just ride around now. I have no idea where I'm trying to go. I already went this way earlier today in my car. You know, one thing, it's 3 a.m. and there's this many cars out here. I can't really believe it myself. 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and there's this many people out here.